Hello everyone, welcome back. This is a new lecture in your course, Advanced JavaScript Programming from Avionics. My name is Ahmed, and in this section we are discussing the very basic building stones of JavaScript. And in this lecture we are starting our discussion of the switch statement. In the previous lecture we have seen how we can use the if condition in order to make decisions based on the truthfulness of a condition, and to use the else if condition if the first condition was not met, and finally to use the else condition if all the conditions have failed. Whenever you see your else if statements getting larger and larger, consider using a switch statement. A switch statement is just a code block that is used when you want to compare a value to a number of possible values and execute a statement or more based on this equality. So for example, in this code block, we are having a script that will translate the number of the weekday to its name. So for example, weekdays start typically at 0, which is Sunday, until 6, which is Saturday. Okay, so what if you have a program that outputs the weekday as a number rather than a name, and you want a script that translates this number to a day? You can use a switch statement for this. So the first thing we have to do is to initialize our variable. Let's declare a variable that will be called day. So var day equals, let's say, 2. Okay, and let's use the switch statement like this. Switch followed by the variable in rounded brackets. In our case, it's day, followed by an opening curly brace, and then start our case statements. Case followed by the value that you want to compare to. So here we have a possible value of 0, and if it is, let's alert. And again, alert is a built-in function in JavaScript that prints a dialog box, a browser dialog box, to the screen containing the text that we add in as its argument. And we're going to study functions in detail in the next section. Just understand that it is a mini program that accepts some text, and it's gonna print this text in the window that will appear in the browser. So alert, if it is 0, alert it's Sunday. Okay, and break. And the reason we are using break here is that if we didn't, we will not be able to separate this case statement from the next case statement. If we omitted break here, it will execute the code in case 0, and it will also execute the code in case 1. So of course this doesn't make sense, because I wanted to execute some code if it is 0, if it's Sunday, and another code if it is Monday. So let's alert it's Monday and break. Let's copy this code and paste it for, okay, so case 0, case 1, case 2, and of course I can go along until I finish the 7 days, but let's, for the sake of time, let's stop at case 2 and then type the default. And the default here is like the else statement in the traditional if conditions. The else statement, as we have mentioned, is a catch-all condition. It will work if all the above conditions have failed, and this is the same thing that happens in switch statements. If all the conditions that preceded has failed, if it is not Sunday, Monday, or I'm sorry, let's change this to Tuesday. Okay, if it is not this, or that, then let's say I don't know what day it is, assuming that the program or the user or whatever has given us the day number, the weekday number has given us an invalid number, and at that case the case statement will print I don't know what day it is. Probably it's an invalid number. And of course type break and close the curly brace. Now press enter. Okay, it's Tuesday. Okay, so let's have another look at the case statement. It starts with the switch keyword followed by an open rounded bracket, inside which we have the variable that we want to compare, and we open a curly brace and start adding our case statements. The case statement starts with the case keyword followed by the possible value to be compared to the variable. This could be anything that produces a value. You're not obliged, you don't have to just enter 0, you can add just a variable that has the value of 0 or any expression that yields 0, okay? But you cannot enter logical operations here. It is testing here for equality. For example, you cannot say case more than 3, for example. If the day is more than 3, do so and so. No, you cannot do that. You will have to equate the value here with the value of the variable here. So, as we said, it is either one of possible values. It is not greater than, it is not smaller than, it is just equating. It has to be equal this variable in is value in order to work. Okay, so here in a typical situation, I will have case 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I will type Sunday, Monday, Tuesday till Saturday, and depending on the day that I have, here I have a day number 2, which corresponded to Tuesday. If I change the day to whatever other day that is not in the select options here, it would just print I don't know what day it is. So let's say we have a day that is equal to 10, which actually is not a valid day, even if we typed the whole weekdays here. And of course, the statement will be I don't know what day it is. Day number 10, of course, is an undefined day. Now let's start discussing loops. And again, loops are one of the most commonly used statements and blocks in JavaScript. A typical JavaScript code will contain a loop, an if condition, and an array at least. These are the most common code statements you will use in your JavaScript programming life. So loops in general are used to execute one or more code statements more than once. Okay? The while loop in particular will execute one or more code statements as long as a condition is valid. And valid here means true, the Boolean true. The syntax is very simple. It's just while, the while keyword, followed by a rounded bracket, followed by any expression that yields a condition that is true. And as long as this condition is true, the statements that follows the curly brace here, the statements that are between the opening and the closing curly braces here will be executed. So in this example, we are setting, let's execute this example here in our console window. We are setting I to be 0, and we have a nums array. We are going to fill this nums array with the values of I. So while I, and I has been just initialized here, it has been declared and initialized, I equals 0, and as long as I is less than 10, let's populate nums with the value of I. So what we're doing here is that we are assigning the location number I with the value of I. So the location, if you recall from a previous lecture when we talked about arrays, arrays contain elements in specific locations starting at 0 and so on. So here I'm using I as both the location of the element and the value of the element. So the location of 0 will have the number 0, the location 1 will have the number 1, and so on and so forth. So nums I equals I, and don't forget to change the value of I. Otherwise, if I kept the loop like this, it will continue indefinitely because I will never reach 10. It will always be 0, and loop will always continue because it doesn't see any change in the I value. The I will start at 0, and as long as it doesn't reach 10, the loop will continue. But when we increment I by 1 in each iteration, it will be at the first iteration 0, at the second iteration 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and as soon as it passes the 9th iteration, it will stop because at the next iteration it will have the value of 10, which is not less than 10. Accordingly, the whole loop will exit. So let's close this curly brace and hit enter. And as you can see here, it has had 9 iterations. If we have a look at nums array, you will see that it contains all the values of I from 0 to 9. The 10 values of I has filled the 10 locations of the array starting at 0 and ending at 9. So this is how you can use the while loop in order to fill the nums array with values. And actually, more often than not, you are going to use loops to work with arrays. This is the most common use of loops. Of course, you can use loops in any other programming task you may deem required, But I'm telling you the most common usage of loops is in arrays. You either populate an array or read through an array or modify some elements in an array using the loops. And that was the while loop. Now we have another type of loop that is somewhat related to the while loop, but it's called a do-while loop. The difference between the while and the do-while loop is that the do-while loop will execute the iteration at least once, no matter what the expression that was used to evaluate it was. So in this example here, we are setting var I, we are setting I to equal to 1, okay? And again, we have the nums array. Let's initialize it to be empty. And then we start our do-while loop. It starts with a do, and notice here that do is not followed by an expression. It is just do and the opening curly brace, which gives you a hint about what this loop is going to do. It is going to execute the statement without even looking at the exits, without even looking at the condition that lets it continue. So do nums I, it's the same code that we did in the previous example. And for a change, let's make it I multiplied by 2. Let's add I times 2. Instead of just adding the value of I, let's multiply by 2 for a change. And of course, I plus plus. Okay, so it will start at 1 and it will increment by 1 with each iteration. And then we close the curly brace and then we add our while keyword. Now, see the difference here. While I is less than 0. Okay, now read the loop again. Do what? Do nums I equals I times 2. Do add the value of I to the location I in the nums array. Just multiply the value that you're going to put, which is the value of I, by 2 before you add it. And at the next statement, increment I by 1 and do this while I is less than 0, which is not the case, and it will never be the case. I'm assigning 1 to I, so I will never, and it's even not now less than 0, either before the iteration or after the iteration, either before you increment it or after you increment it, it will never get less than 0 because it is starting at 1. However, let's see what happens when we execute this loop. Okay, as you can see here, the nums array has the first item to be undefined, and of course that's normal because the location number 0 contained nothing. We are adding I at the position number 1 here, and the value at position number 1, which is the position of which is the value that I held in its iteration, had the number 2. Okay, because we multiplied I by 2, so the position number 1 in the array contained the value 2, as you can see here in the nums array. The first item is undefined and the second item is 2. But notice here that the loop did one iteration although I is not less than 0. Okay, if you're using a while loop here, it will never execute. It would never iterate even one iteration because I is never less than 0. But because we are using a do-while loop, the iteration is guaranteed to run at least once even if the condition was not met. Now, one of the most commonly used loops, especially with arrays, as we mentioned, is the for loop. The for loop will let you execute a statement or more a specific number of times rather than when a condition is met. The syntax is just for followed by 3 tokens. The first one is the initialization, as you can see here, followed by the condition and separated by a semicolon. So you type the initialization code followed by semicolon, followed by the condition, followed by a semicolon, and the increment statement, followed by a curly brace and the statements that you want to execute that number of times, and you close curly brace. The initialization is simply the variable that you are going to use in the array, in the loop, and it has to be initialized to some value before it is being used. So in this example, we are initializing I to be 0. This is the initial value of I. Then we move on to the condition. This is the condition by which the loop will continue as long as it proves to be true. So as long as I is less than 6, I was initialized to be 0, and as long as it's less than 6, keep on going. And of course, you will have to increment I by 1 in order to ensure that I is changing. Okay, so here we can do the same thing that we did with the while and the do loops. And the do while loops, let's initialize the nums array again to be an empty array. Okay, and let's start our for loop for var I equals 0 and I is less than 6 and I plus plus. Okay, let's add nums I equals I times 2 again. Okay, sorry. And as you can see here, the nums array has been filled with the values of I, which started at 0, and multiplied by 2. So it's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. It is the even numbers from 0 to 10. So this is a simple way to iterate through the values of a variable, which is I, as long as the condition holds, which is I is less than 6. Okay, and the last and the easiest type of loops is the for in loops. The for in loop is primarily used to work with arrays, and in a future section we'll see that it is also used to work with objects. The main advantage of the for in loop is that it is used when you do not know the number of iterations that you want the loop to iterate. You don't have the condition by which the loop will stop, and you don't have the number of iterations you wanted to execute. This is most commonly used when you have an array with an unidentified number of elements, and you want to loop through all these elements at the same time, and you want to loop through all these elements, so we will do a for in loop. The syntax is very easy, so let's return back to the fruits array here. I hope it's still there. Okay, yes, it's still there. The syntax of the for loop is very simple. Just type for followed by a variable in the array or in the object when we are going to cover objects. So it's for I in fruits. Okay, let's first define a variable called text that will hold an empty string. Okay, and we'll see why in a moment. Now let's start our loop for I in fruits. Okay, and notice here that we are not initializing the value of I. We're not even declaring I, the normal way we declare variables, because I will automatically hold the element location of the array in each iteration. So in the first iteration, it will hold the location number of 0. The second one, it will hold the location of 1, 2, 3, and so on. So in each of its iterations, I will hold the location of, or the element index. Location is sometimes referred to as index in the array terminology. So in each iteration, I will hold the index or the location of each element in fruits. So for I in fruits, text equals text, concatenate to it I, concatenate to it a new line in order to be visible. Okay, and let's close the curly brace and hit enter. And as you can see here, it started with 0, the element number 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the third one here is an array. Okay, but that doesn't matter now. All what matters now is that I held the location or the index of the element in each iteration starting from 0 and ending at 3. So why did we have here this statement? Why did we use text equals text concatenating to it I and $n? Because at each iteration I will hold the new value of the index. So in order to store the old value and print it to the screen, we'll have to add to the text string that value. So text equals text, the old value of text, followed by the new value, that is the value of I. So the first iteration, text had an empty string, added to it 0. Then in the second iteration, it had the value of 0, and we added to it the new I, which is 1, then 2, then 3. And a shorthand for this is this one. You can replace this statement with plus equal. Plus equal is the same as text equals text plus. Okay, So it's just plus equal, and of course we remove this plus sign. So text is plus equal I plus n. But what's the benefit of just typing the location of the element? We need the value of this element, not just the index. Okay, so in this case, we can just type fruits, which is the array name, followed by the square brackets, followed by I, which will hold the index or the location of the element. And as we recall, when we studied arrays, we can call the value of an element in the array by just calling its index like this. So here I am typing, and of course a text had the original value of 0, 1, 2, 3. Let's reinitialize it to an empty string in order to see this in a clear view. Okay, let's clear the screen. Okay, sorry. Okay, so it's oranges, apples, bananas, and then the last element in the fruits array, as we recall, is another array that contains blackberries, blueberries, and strawberries. Now, the last thing we're going to cover in this section is comments, and comments should be used. Actually, many people find that it's a waste of time to comment their code and to add comments to their statements, and actually it is strongly recommended to comment your code, especially in those large scripts. Soon you will find that you are writing scripts that span tens or even hundreds of lines, and if you do not comment your code, maybe a few days later when you come back to your code and try to read it in order to make changes, and you will make changes and you will have to read your code multiple times, you will find that it is very difficult because you suddenly forgot what that code snippet did or what that block of code did. So commenting your code is a strongly advised habit. It should be your second nature. So how does JavaScript accept comments? It is very simple and easy. It accepts two types of comments. Either the one preceded by a double slash, like this. If you type here, this is a comment. Okay. It is only one line. This means that this comment will only span one line. If I typed another line under it, it will be just a new command. The other type of comment is a slash followed by an asterisk, and then I can type whatever I want. This is a comment that will span multiple lines, and I can type whatever I want, and all this is a comment, a long one, and it can span multiple lines, and it won't stop until I explicitly close it using asterisk followed by a slash like this. So the difference between both is that the first one will be terminated or will finish as soon as I press the new line character, as soon as I press enter, while the other one will finish only when I type asterisk followed by slash when I explicitly close the comment. Otherwise, it will continue to span multiple lines. So again, use comments, use them wisely, don't abuse comments. Some people just use comments overly, and believe it or not, this will make your code even more unreadable. So for example, if I have a statement like this, A equals John, okay, it is nice to have first name assigned to A. Okay, so A is John after this makes sense. Okay, however, writing a comment like this, A is a string that will hold first name of the user and it, okay, this is not recommended. Writing too much unnecessary wording in your comments is not recommended, the same way as not writing comments at all is not recommended as well. It's just a matter of discretion. It's a matter of your own way of writing comments. Just keep it in a way that will make your code readable, but not crowded, so that it remains readable for you and for other developers as well. And that brings us to the end of this lecture and to the end of this section in Advanced JavaScript Programming from Unix. My name is Ahmed, and in the second section, we are going to discuss functions. So see you next. Thank you.